dokey. 2 discoveries. 1, look at all that metal on there. That's no good. I guess this is the drain plug. I hope it's the drain plug. I took it out. Fluid came out, so I think it's the drain plug. But there is a lot of metal on there, so that's no good. The other thing is, there is water in the fluid. Holy sh**. And it looks like there is a crap ton of metal in it too, so yeah, it might have been a good idea to take this apart. This probably would have been the first thing to go after I had it all rebuilt. So that's my findings so far. We're just going to let it drain a little bit, enjoy some Angry Orchard, and I guess tear into it some more when it's fully drained out. All right. Alrighty, so I've come to the conclusion that I'm going to need a manual for this. I've gotten as far as I'm comfortable with without knowing what I'm doing, and so to prevent breaking parts that aren't going to be too cheap to replace, I'm going to buy a manual, see what I need to do to take the rest of it apart, because doing this freestyle isn't a good idea. I did look in there though. One of the gears looks like it's got a chipped tooth. I mean, the entire ring's got a big old hole in it. And it's not machined, it's a chip. And the splines aren't stripped. They're not stripped here. They're not stripped on the shaft, so I was wrong there. I could spin both yokes independently of each other, so I'm sure there's a gearing deal that allows that to happen, and something's wrong with it, so that the rear wheel drive gears are just always spinning independent of the front wheel instead of locking together like they're supposed to. Alrighty, so past me is full of bullshit. The reason that I could only ever drive my Jeep around in 4-wheel drive is because I didn't know that the transfer case needed to be in too high for the rear wheels to work at all. I thought that the transfer case needed to be in neutral and that the transmission would just do whatever it does. So that was operator error. One of the gears having a chip in it, wasn't a gear. It was the neutral point on, I think, the forward or the rear output shaft. And what I thought was a chip was actually a casting into the neutral point of the shifting slider. And the last part is I didn't do my homework on the transfer case, and I thought that it was a Dana 20 instead of a Dana 300. So I ended up buying some wrong parts, which I'll get into here in a little bit. So yeah, just wanted to clarify that. Past me, idiot. Alrighty guys, so I got the transfer case done. I kind of went into panic mode while I was rebuilding it. I needed some time. I was trying to get a lot of stuff done, so I forgot to video and photograph me getting this done. But I will try to kind of explain what I did, kind of explain some of the problems I ran into, tell you some of the tools I used, and just give you basically an overview of how this all ended up going together. So I guess the first thing that I should go over is the rebuild kits. Novak Conversions is, they make a really good rebuild kit. It's basically a professional deal. They're all right on price. They're, $230 for a master rebuild, which includes your bearings and your idler shaft and all the shims, all the gaskets, everything. Except for gears. Gears are super expensive, so yeah. If you're just looking for a gasket kit, and I think it comes with the shims and the seals and all that, is that's just $30. So they're pretty good on prices. The problem I ran into was not at their end, but at mine with the rebuild kits. I thought that this was a Dana 20 transfer case. It's not. It's a Dana 300 long output. What I ended up buying the first time was just a Dana 20 rebuild kit, which was completely wrong. Nothing matched, and I didn't open anything because I was like, this doesn't seem right. I looked at the numbers on my case, and I typed them in, and I called up Novak, and they're like, yeah, no, dude, you got a 300. I was like, okay. So I returned the Dana 20 rebuild kit. I'm still waiting on it to get there so I can get my refund for it. And I bought the Dana 300 rebuild kit. Now here's the other mistake I made. This is a long output transfer case, right? I bought a short output. Now, just about everything between the two will work, and this is kind of proof. All of the, yeah, you hear that? All of the end play and the shafts is correct. Everything spins, although with a little bit of help from a yoke, because, it's really hard to spin the transmission and the transfer case just with my hand. I can do it with a yoke on there. Hold on. See? So everything spins. It is in gear. The transfer case is in gear. I don't think that the transmission is, but the transfer case is. The short output rebuild kit will work for a long output transfer case. It's just that you're going to have to, jump some hurdles to get it to work. And that'll bring up the next thing, is kind of the issues that I ran into while I was rebuilding this. The first one was everything went pretty smooth. I thought I was getting it good until I got to this point here. All the bearings from the short output will fit into this case perfectly, so it's why I didn't realize anything was wrong until I tried messing with the end play on this rear output. Now, because I bought the short output and I have a long output, I had to use a crap ton of, hold on, these shims here, these little circular ones. I had to use all of the originals and a lot of them from the kit just to get this end play correct. And it took me, I'd like to say 5 hours just to figure it out. I thought that I had put something together wrong. I thought that I had messed up a race. I thought that I hadn't pressed something on correctly. But this was the only issue, was I had bought the wrong kit, and I ended up just needing more shims. It's a good thing I kept my old parts, otherwise I would have been screwed. So that's the deal there. If you buy the short output, really the only thing you're going to have to deal with is putting more shims in there just to compensate. Another few differences between the kits is the snap ring here. This would go onto the input bearing. It snaps, hold on. When you press this into the input shaft housing, a snap ring like this is used to keep it from backing out. Well, the one that came in the kit, this one was too small, so I ended up having to use the original. That was really the only issue I ran into with that. Not a big deal, just a little thing. Another thing is this. I have no idea what this goes to. I didn't take one off when I took apart my transfer case, and I don't know what this is. It looks like a washer, but it also looks like it's supposed to be a snap ring, so I don't know. It kind of looks like it's the same type of snap ring as that one that holds in that bearing that I just showed you. But there wasn't one like that in here, so I didn't put this in. Another thing is this washer here is kind of a spacer for a bearing on the, let me think. Yeah, it would be a bearing on the rear output here. You put this on and then you put the bearing on and it spaces it. I don't know what model or year this would be on. I think it's late models that had these little tabs on them because mine didn't have the grooves to accept this. So I just ended up having to use the original. So that's a difference there, is that I had to use the original spacing washer for that bearing. Another deal is that for the idler gears, because I have the long output and I bought the short output, these are the spacers for the idler needle bearings for the short output. The needle bearings for the long output have a wider center spacer. So I ended up having to use the originals for that as well. So again, not a big deal. It all fits back together real easy. It's just, it was kind of a bummer because the parts weren't shiny. But yeah, so there's another difference. It's just the center one is a different width. Here's another deal. These shims, I have absolutely no idea what these go to. I didn't take any off when I took apart the transfer case, and so I didn't put these on. I didn't even see a place where these would fit. So I left those off. And last is these shims here. I did actually use these. These transferred right over to this transfer case from the short output. So these are the shims that control the end play for your front output shaft. These were actually really easy to mess with. So that was the deal there. The kind of the differences between the two rebuild kits. All the gaskets are the same. The process is identical. It's just that because there's a short output is shorter, I had to compensate for my mistake there and just widen everything out again. And really the only thing that I had to compensate for was these here. I just had to add more of these shims and it all worked out. Everything else was either just reuse what I already had or use what was in the kit because it fit. Excuse me. The other thing that came in the kit was a new idler shaft. Sorry for kind of rolling back, but the kit came with a new idler shaft, and I didn't use this one. It does go to this. I didn't use it because it has two grooves for O-rings. And I tried to put this in with the two O-rings on it, and it just took it. The O-ring picked up the needle bearings and squished it out the other side, and it just seriously pissed me off. So I immediately gave up on this instead of ruining both O-rings and having to buy new ones. So, I mean, if anybody wants this, contact me. It's for sale now. So I just used the original. It only has one O-ring groove. The back side is more of like a press fit, so nothing squeegees out back there. But since I hadn't squished this first O-ring on it, I just put that one onto the original shaft and put the original shaft back in. And that went in a lot smoother. And this right here is just a little cap for, I think it's the poppet balls. For your shifting. Now it came with two, and I only used one because I also have a four-wheel drive indicating sensor. And so this was just like a leftover from that. Alright, so that is kind of the differences between the kits and what I ended up using. So now I guess I'm just going to talk about how I adjusted the end play on this. So the manual for these is for the 300s is very it's a very good manual. It walks you through it step by step, and what they don't tell you, you can go onto YouTube and find yourself. some of the things that hung me up, I went to YouTube and looked, and it wasn't stuff that the YouTube videos explicitly were trying to explain. It's just that I was watching what they were doing, and I noticed the orientation of things, torque specs, things like that, that they don't explicitly tell you, but that you can notice if you're paying attention to the video, and that you can use to help you rebuild your own kit. But back to adjusting the shims. The manual is very good, and it tells you what you need to do, but because I bought the wrong rebuild kit for the rear output shaft here, like I said, I had to work on it for forever to get it right. And the deal is, you have your bearing races already installed in here, your big bearing. This is the biggest roller bearing in the kit. This one's already pressed onto the shaft, and the race is pressed into the housing. And the smaller one, this isn't the right bearing, but it'll be a pretty good prop. The race is pressed into the housing, but the bearing is just kind of free floating until you finish install. So the deal is you have your shaft in here, and you're about to put on your housing, and before you put your housing on and your bearing on, you put on your shims. After you put on your shims, you put on the housing, you tighten it all down, and then you put your bearing in there. Once that's done, you take your yoke, you put it on here, and you torque it to 120 foot-pounds, and that'll put the bearing onto the shaft. It'll press fit it down onto the shaft, and it'll also help you to figure out your end play. And the amount of shims you have will determine your end play. The spec for it is between 3 and 5 thousandths, or is it 2 and 5? It's either 2 and 5 or 3 and 5 thousandths. I have 3 right here. You can't see it move, but you can hear it. And the way you have to figure this out is by just torquing everything down, and then you have to have a dial indicator. You take a dial indicator and you check for end play. If it's wrong, you have to take it all apart and either add or remove shims until you get it right. For these, it's 1-to-1. You put these shims on, and whatever's on there will directly affect your end play. So if you have a micrometer, you can take all of these, mic them, and whatever your end play is, if you want to adjust it, you can literally walk through each of these, be like, that's not the right one, that's not the right one, that's not the right one, until you get to where you need to be. So that could make it easier for you to do this in 2 shots instead of doing it in 6, just by kind of randomly guessing which ones work. But like I said, this deal threw me because I had to use more shims than they say you have to, because I bought the wrong deal. So that was really my main hang-up, was trying to figure that out. So for the front output shaft, these are the shims you use. Oh, sorry, let's go back. Now, you'll see that there's some RTV here. The manual will tell you to put the RTV on every time you try to do this, and for good reason. It adds a little bit of width here, which will affect your end play. But the deal is that it's super hard to figure out your end play with this stuff on here, because you have to clean all this stuff off every time you get it wrong and have to restart. So what you do is you put it all together dry. You don't even put the seal in. They'll tell you to put the oil seal in. Don't do that. I broke 2 of them trying to figure out the end play on this with the seal on. I watched a YouTube video. The guy was like, don't do that. That's stupid. It does affect your end play, but so small that so long as you're kind of in the middle of where it needs to be, it'll put you a little bit towards the looser extreme. So really, if you want to be lower, when you finally put the RTV on, it'll kind of bring you closer to dead center on where you need to be for your end play. So really, that's the deal. Don't put in the seal and don't put in the RTV until you have your end play locked in and you're ready for final install. Now for the front output shaft, I'm going to run on back to that. These are the shims that you use. It's the same deal. They're going to ask you to put your RTV on and all of your stuff while you're trying to figure this out. Don't do it. It's not worth it. In final install, I put RTV on the cover here. I don't even know if you can see that. So for final install, I put RTV on the cover here, and I also put it on the case. They say that you want to put shellac or some kind of spray-on lacquer onto the shims before you put them on. And I think that that's to keep them from leaking, but because I put enough RTV on here, it kind of surrounded these, so I don't think that they're going to leak. But that's for final install. When you're just trying to find your end play on it, just leave it dry. Don't do anything to it. The other thing when trying to find your end play is that the front output housing comes with a gasket, and you need to put that in when you're trying to find your end play because it's about as thick as one of these shims. And I didn't do that for the first few times. I was like, oh yeah, I got my my end play locked in, put the gasket on, tried to final install it, and I was like, oh crap. Everything was way too loose after that. So I didn't RTV the gasket, so I took it all apart. And then I took the front output housing and I put the gasket on dry, and then I found my my end play. And then I finally installed it. Now, what I could have done is I could have RTV'd the gasket down because you really don't need to take the front input housing on and off to figure out your end play on that deal. This is all you have to worry about. So that's just kind of the deal there. I got into a little bit of a tizzy and I was like taking the whole thing apart and putting it back together every time I got it wrong. You don't need to do that. You can final install the front housing and then just work your end play with the back deal here. So yeah, that's basically how I figured out the end play on all this, and basically kind of my advice on how you should do it too. So once I figured out the end plays on these deals, I couldn't put the oil seals in. I should have put the oil seals in and the yokes on. But I couldn't do that because, like I said, I broke them while trying to figure out the end play on this one. I have them ordered. They'll be here tomorrow or the day after that. So yeah, generally at this particular point there would be a seal in here and a yoke. But because I broke that, I moved on to working on the shifting forks. Now, there is a YouTube video that explains how to do this really well, and I will link it in the description because they'll explain it a whole hell of a lot better than I can for putting the shifting rods into the into your housing and up and through the case. Something that I will say though is that I used a dead blow and a pry bar to kind of align the shift forks on the rods, just because when you're trying to push the rods through, the shift forks are going to try to tweak like this, and it's a really tight fit, and so it's not going to want to move through. So I used the pry bar and the hammer and just kind of straightened it out, moved it a little bit, it tweaked again, straightened it out, moved it a little bit, tweaked again. So that's how I got the rods in there. Yeah, really that's all pretty easy to figure out. Like I said, I'm going to link a video in the description because they'll do a lot better job of explaining it than I will for doing your shifting rods and all that. So let's move on to, I guess, some of the tools that I was using. Now, in order to take this all apart and put it back together, some people say you can do it with a hammer. If you can do it with a hammer, you should join, I don't know, World's Strongest Man or something, because it takes a lot of force to put this stuff together. I have a 12-ton press that I got from Harbor Freight. They're not that expensive, so it's really worth it to buy one. The only issue is that a lot of this stuff you have to press in the case, so it's really awkward to figure out how to do, but it can be done, and so I did it. Now, a lot of people will try to use sockets or whatever to press in races and to press things together, and it's a pain in the ass to figure out which one will work. I know for a fact that this bearing race will work for the bearing race that I'm replacing, because they're exactly the same size, and I can get this in there most of the way and still pop it out without any issues. The other thing is keep the bearing, and then you can use this whole deal to do it, because if you try to just use this, you're going to be fighting, trying to figure out some way to get your press to get on, to touch this evenly. So if you've got the bearing in there and then you put like a socket or something on top of that, this is a really good way to press bearing races in. And these are just the old bearings. I've got 3 of them here. It's because that's the 3 sizes that kind of came in the transfer case. This one goes on to your input housing. It's held in with the snap ring, like I said. This one is attached to, let me think, your rear output. It's a large one. It's in the housing, and the bearing is pressed onto the output shaft. And this one is either the bearing that's here in the rear output, or it's one of the bearings that helps the front output shaft spin. So that's what these are. But this bearing race here is the same width for both of these and the one up here. So this one can be used for pressing on the bearing race for each of these races. So these are some of the pressing tools that I used. I tried to use a whole bunch of stuff, sockets, wood, whatever I could get my hands on to get this thing back together. But the bearing races really did work the best. Another thing is punches. I think that I said, I may not have, it might have been in a previous take, but I think that I said that you're going to need a press to take it apart. And that was true and false at the same time. True because, yeah, it takes a lot of effort to take it apart. False because you're never going to get that press to get some of the races out of these housings. For that, you need a punch kit. Now, I am a big fan of Harbor Freight. Cheap. The tools aren't absolute crap. I mean, they're pretty bad, but they're not so bad that they can't be used a few times. So I got a Pittsburgh punch set from them, and this came in really handy for punching the races out of the housings. It's just it's something that has to be done. If you try to use a screwdriver or something like that, it's just not going to work. Because you're going to bend the crap out of the screwdriver, and then you're going to end up touching this aluminum housing, and you're going to scratch the crap out of it. Something is that this is the wrong tool to use. What you really want to use is a brass drift or something softer than the aluminum. If these right here, if you're not careful, you will score the crap out of those aluminum housings, and you'll chip stuff, and it's almost what I ended up doing. I kind of mushroomed some of the aluminum stuff up. Not too bad that I was worried about it, but it did happen. So you kind of got to be careful with metal punches when you're working with really any kind of metal softer than it or on an equal hardness with it. So that was, yeah. So that's some of the tools that I used. That's just kind of how the transfer case came apart and went back together. This video is going to be a little bit weird, but I'm kind of trying to patch together some of the footage that I took from earlier and try to make a little explanation for it now. So the only thing that I'm waiting for, I can't remember if I said it or not, is that I need the seals for the transfer case. There's a seal that goes here, seal that goes here. On the front and rear outputs, I'll put the yokes on, and this bad boy will be done. Next thing I'll have to do is put the engine back together and jab it into the car. So, alrighty, bye.